Emily Carter stepped onto the familiar ground of Ashton after 10 years. The town she had once left behind greeted her with silence, broken only by the rustling of wind in the crowns of old trees. The streets she used to run along in her youth seemed the same, but now they were filled with unfamiliar faces. The old buildings, with their weathered facades, seemed to whisper about times she had tried to erase from her memory. Every step on the pavement reminded her of something long forgotten, yet still lingering in the depths of her mind. She returned not of her own will. Her mother's death forced her to come back here to deal with the inheritance. But the longer Emily stayed in Ashton, the more she felt the shadows of the past closing in around her. Memories she had so carefully buried were now breaking free. Old grievances, unspoken words, regrets, all of it surfaced in her mind, making it hard to focus on the present. She felt as though the town, alive in its own way, was pulling her deeper, toward what she had been running from for so long. And Emily realized, to move forward, she would have to face the past head-on. The house on Hill Street, where Emily had spent her childhood, now seemed empty and lifeless. The air was filled with silence, broken only by the creak of the floorboards beneath her steps. Every room held memories she tried to suppress, but they persistently surfaced in her mind, like old photographs yellowed with time. She walked slowly through the hallways, touching the frames on the walls, behind which lay the faces of the past, smiles that would never be repeated. Her mother, Margaret, had always been strict and reserved, as if keeping her distance even in the most important moments. Now that she was gone, Emily felt a strange emptiness mixed with a sense of unfinished business. She began sorting through her mother's belongings, stumbling upon old letters, diaries, and trinkets that once seemed significant. Among them, she found an envelope with her name written in her mother's handwriting. The letters were neat but slightly shaky, as if Margaret had written them with effort. Emily hesitated to open it. Her hand trembled as she held the envelope, as if it were filled not with words but with something far heavier. She knew it could be the key to understanding their complicated relationship, to the question she had never dared to ask. But the fear of what she might discover held her back. The house grew even quieter, as if the walls were waiting for her to take the next step. Emily got a job at a local company called Silverline, which specialized in interior design. It was a temporary solution while she sorted out her affairs in Ashton, but the job quickly became a refuge for her. Her colleagues turned out to be friendly and supportive, and the projects demanded her full commitment, which helped distract her from intrusive thoughts about the past. Each new assignment became a challenge, forcing her to focus on details and creative solutions. However, the deeper she immersed herself in the work, the more she felt that her career in New York, which she had so carefully built, began to seem distant and insignificant. At times, Emily caught herself thinking that her former ambitions and aspirations, which once seemed unshakable, were now losing their importance. She wondered if she had lost herself in the pursuit of success, if she had become a victim of her own illusions. Working at Silverline brought her satisfaction, but at the same time, it made her rethink her priorities. Perhaps it was here, far from the noise of the big city, that she could find what truly mattered. But for now, the answers remained elusive, and the past continued to remind her of itself, albeit not as insistently as before. One evening, while stopping by a local cafe, Emily unexpectedly ran into Jacob. He was standing at the counter, ordering coffee, and his profile seemed both familiar and strange to her. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Jacob looked older, there were wrinkles around his eyes, his features slightly rougher, but his smile, the same one that once made her heart race, remained unchanged. "Emily?" he said, and his voice sounded as if they had parted just yesterday, not years ago. She nodded, trying to maintain her composure. They exchanged a few meaningless phrases. About the weather, about the city, about how everything had changed. But with every word, Emily felt as though old wounds, seemingly long healed, began to bleed again. It became hard for her to breathe. "It's time for me to go," she interrupted him, barely holding back the tremor in her voice. She quickly walked out of the cafe, leaving Jacob with a bewildered look. Outside, the cold wind stung her face, but it did nothing to calm the chaos in her mind. The thought that he was still here, in Ashton, wouldn't leave her alone. What if she hadn't left back then? What if they could have fixed everything? Questions without answers swirled in her mind, making her heart ache with pain and regret. Emily held the envelope in her hands for a long time, her fingers trembling slightly. She knew that inside were words her mother would never be able to speak aloud again. Finally, taking a deep breath, she opened the letter. The paper was slightly yellowed, the ink faded, but Margaret's handwriting remained as clear as it had been in life. The mother wrote about her regrets, about how much she wanted to mend her relationship with her daughter but couldn't find the words to express her feelings. She admitted that she had always been proud of Emily, but her strictness and coldness were merely an attempt to protect her daughter from the mistakes she herself had made in her youth. Margaret wrote that she was afraid Emily might follow in her footsteps, and that's why she tried to be firm, even if it hurt them both. Emily felt tears welling up in her eyes. She had always seen her mother as a strict, distant woman who never understood her. But now, reading these lines, she realized that Margaret had been just as much a prisoner of her own fears and expectations as she herself was. Her mother didn't know how to express love, how to show that she was there, and that made her even lonelier. The letter became a revelation. Emily suddenly realized that her grievances, her anger, all of it was just a reflection of their shared pain. She closed her eyes, imagining her mother sitting at the table, writing these lines, knowing that time was running out. In that moment, Emily felt something inside her begin to change. The past, which she had carried within herself for so long, suddenly began to look different. Emily decided to distract herself from her intrusive thoughts and went to a play at the local theater. It was her first cultural event in months, and she eagerly anticipated the moment when she could immerse herself in the world of art. The hall was full, the atmosphere filled with anticipation. When the curtain rose, she was completely absorbed in what was happening on stage, enjoying the actors' skill and the beauty of the set design. However, at some point, her attention shifted. She suddenly realized she was watching the stage through her mother's eyes. Margaret had always adored the theater and often took her to performances as a child. These memories flooded back with unexpected intensity. Emily felt how much of her life, her interests, habits, even her way of perceiving the world, was rooted in the past, in those moments she had tried so hard to forget. She sat in the dimly lit hall, trying to make sense of how deeply her present was still tied to what she had so desperately wanted to leave behind. Thoughts swirled in her head, and she realized that the past, like a shadow, followed her relentlessly, reminding her of itself in the most unexpected moments. Emily stared at the phone for a long time before dialing the number. Calling her sister, with whom she had barely spoken in recent years, felt like stepping into the unknown. Lily lived in another city, and their relationship had long since turned into a formality, as if both had resigned themselves to this distance. But something inside Emily told her that this conversation was necessary. When Lily responded, her voice sounded cautious but not cold. They started with the usual topics: work, the weather, everyday matters. However, gradually, the conversation grew deeper. Lily, usually reserved, began to talk about things she had kept silent about for years. She admitted that she had always felt overshadowed by her older sister. "You were always so confident, so strong," she said quietly. "And I always compared myself to you and felt like I fell short." These words struck a chord with Emily. She had never thought that her success and confidence could be the cause of someone else's pain. Lily spoke about her insecurities, about how childhood grievances and comparisons with her sister had affected her adult life. Emily listened, and her heart ached with pain. She suddenly realized that their past was not just her personal story. It had left scars on those who were close to her as well. When the conversation ended, Emily sat in silence for a long time, reflecting on what she had heard. She felt the weight of responsibility. Perhaps it was already too late to change anything, but she understood that she had to try. If only so that Lily would no longer feel alone in that shadow. Emily walked slowly along the path of the old city park, where she had spent so much time in her childhood. The air was filled with the scent of fresh foliage, and the rustling of the trees seemed to lull her thoughts. She breathed in the coolness of the autumn morning, trying to find solace in the familiar scenery. But the deeper she ventured into the park, the more vivid the memories became, memories she had long tried to forget. Before her, as if in a fog, images of the past emerged. She saw herself as a little girl walking beside her mother. They often strolled here, but their walks were rarely accompanied by conversation. Back then, Emily thought that this silence was a sign of alienation, a lack of closeness. Now, years later, she realized that wasn't the case. Her mother simply didn't know how to express her feelings in words, but her love showed in quiet moments, in her patient presence, in the way she was always there. Emily stopped by the old bench where they used to sit together. She touched the cold wooden surface, and something stirred in her heart. Memories that once seemed empty and joyless now took on new meaning. She felt a growing sense of gratitude within her for those moments she once couldn't appreciate. Perhaps it was now that she began to understand that love doesn't always speak loudly, sometimes it stays silent, but that doesn't make it any less profound. Emily stood by the window, gazing at the quiet streets of Ashton. In her hand was a plane ticket to New York, purchased a week ago. But as the day of departure drew closer, she felt more strongly that she couldn't just leave. The big city, which had once lured her with its opportunities and bright lights, now seemed foreign and empty. Here, in this small town, she had begun to find what she had been missing for so long. Peace, a connection to the past, and perhaps hope for the future. She sighed, placing the ticket on the table. Thoughts of her sister, with whom she had barely spoken in recent years, of the house left behind by her grandmother, and of those unresolved issues that trailed behind her like shadows, wouldn't let her rest. Emily understood that if she left now, everything would remain unfinished. She wouldn't be able to move forward until she dealt with what she had left behind. The decision didn't come easily to her. New York had been a part of her life, a place where she had built her career and dreamed of her future. But now she felt that this future no longer belonged to her. Staying in Ashton meant starting over from scratch, but it was the only way to find peace. Slowly, she picked up the ticket and tore it, feeling the weight of her doubts begin to lift. Ahead of her lay difficult conversations, unexpected discoveries, and perhaps, a long-awaited reconciliation with herself. Emily stood by the window of her new apartment in Ashton, watching as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the city streets. She no longer felt the oppressive fear that had once haunted her. The shadows of the past, which had once seemed like a threat, had now become part of her story, her identity. She had learned to accept them, understanding that without them, she wouldn't have the strength that now resided within her. Her life was gradually finding harmony. Her relationship with Lily, though still complicated, was becoming more sincere. They were learning to listen to each other, to find common ground, and this brought Emily a sense of relief. Working at Silverline had become more than just an obligation for her, it was an opportunity to fulfill herself. Each day brought new challenges, but she faced them with confidence, knowing she could handle them. Ashton, which once seemed to her a place full of pain and disappointment, had now become her home. The city, with its narrow streets and old buildings, no longer made her want to run away. On the contrary, she felt that it was here, among these walls, that she had found her place. The past could not be changed, but she could learn to live with it, not letting it dictate the rules. Emily took a deep breath, feeling a sense of lightness she hadn't experienced in a long time. She knew that new challenges lay ahead, but now she was ready to face them with an open heart. After all, this was her new beginning, a beginning where she herself would choose how her story would unfold.